Welcome to our podcast, Raising Bigs. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about all the things families might experience in their lives and relationships, both as parents and young adults from teens to 20-somethings, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. In this episode, we're talking about standing up for what's right. These are unusual times we're living in, and many of us are in a place of wanting to stand up for what's right, but also wanting to keep ourselves and our families safe. We're not the first society on this beautiful earth to encounter this situation. It is hitting too close to home for many of us, while others think they are marked safe somehow from what seems to be ahead. We talk a lot in our family about what we can actively do, how we can stand up, and how we can do our best to also stay safe. I never dreamed I would be navigating these choppy waters with my young adults, yet here we are. Let's talk. I'm Marci, and I'm the mom.
I'm Cayd, and I'm her kid. Like my mom, I am also frustrated with the current state of affairs going on in our world. We are sliding down a very slippery slope and toward a version of life that will not be good for the vast majority of us. How do we handle our emotions, channel our energy productively, and take action in a way that feels true to us and also doesn't make our parents lose sleep while worrying about our safety? How do we continue to have hope and believe that there will be a return to a better, safer, and more beautiful version of this place we know as home? I don't know, but we can talk about it today and see how our opinions may be on this topic. So, Mom, what emotions are you experiencing right now around just the current state of our world?
So I think I've moved from disbelief into anger and frustration. I think it's important to realize that some of us are in a state of grieving right now, especially in our country, which is the United States. But I know I have a lot of friends around the world, and they are right there with us, standing beside us in that. So the normal emotions of grief are happening. But right now, I'm really angry. I'm really frustrated. I'm also very scared. But I am not one, if anybody's paid attention to this podcast, not one to let fear stand in the way of me taking action. So yeah, those are the emotions and kind of where I'm sitting right now. It wavers from day to day, and I anticipate that it will continue to progress in the normal pattern of grief, right? Where I think maybe I'm over one part of it, and then another wave will hit. So I'm kind of bracing myself for what is ahead and how we get through these times coming up. How about you, Cayd? What emotions are you experiencing?
I think, like you, it kind of changes as time goes on, sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis. But I think right now I'm kind of at the point of acceptance. I think I've gone through anger and gone through sadness and gone through all of, and not even necessarily just in the political climate that the United States is in, but even in just when you look at things like climate change and, things like that are going on. I think I'm just kind of at a point of acceptance and not necessarily accepting defeat, but accepting that I'm doing my part and doing what I feel is right. And if something happens outside of that, if things go differently, then I just have to accept that and say that that's the way it goes. If I vote and things don't go the way I want, okay, I just have to accept that. If I am doing my part to recycle and turn off lights when I'm not using it and, turn off water when I'm brushing my teeth, if I'm doing my part to do those things, although, like I said, things like climate change and running out of natural resources and stuff are happening, I can accept that because I know that I'm doing my part. And I think that that's something that I have come to realize lately is, yes, you can be angry, yes, you can be upset, but there's nothing more you can do besides what you can do on your end. You can't get people to see the things you're seeing or to get people to change the way they voted or things like. So I think I am kind of at a point of acceptance and knowing that I've done what I can, and however things are going to happen, they're going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that to a certain level, there is only so much we can do, right? And so I think we're kind of in a process of figuring out what those things are and what that looks like. And I also expect that to change, much like I talked about emotions changing and you talked about emotions changing on the dailies. I think we're in a point of discovery right now, right? Like we've accepted we are on the path we're on, at least for the foreseeable future. We'll see how long or short that time period is. But, I think I tend to be almost more frustrated that I sometimes feel I don't have the ability to do more. And so I'm always questioning myself, what else can I do? What else can I do? What else can I do? And so really coming from a place of curiosity, I think right now we're trying to figure out what we can do. So, Cayd, how do you think the younger generations might view this situation differently, And the situation being like everything you just discussed, right? Like it's not just the political climate, but how do the younger generations view this situation differently than the older generations, meaning like myself and the boomers?
I think that with the younger generation, we are a lot more vocal about our opinions, whether that be to our friends and family, publicly through protests and things like that, talking about it on social media, whatever it is. I think there is a lot more conversation going on with the younger generation. And I mean, you can speak to this then, at least from what I know about your generation and older generations, especially when you look at political things. I think a lot of people just kind of were like, okay, I vote this way and that's the way it is. Or, I think that people were just kind of it was a little more of a taboo topic to discuss. And I think that the younger generation is a little more open to those conversations and talking about it and having those conversations.
And I would agree. I think sometimes the older generation, they kind of get into a state of resignation about the way it is. Like, we're just going to let it happen. And they don't necessarily, and this isn't everybody by all means, but don't necessarily feel compelled to actually have the conversations and take any action on their own. They're just battening down the hatches and going into survival mode. Right. And like, I think, your mom is not the average bear, right? And me and my circle of friends and your stepdad, like we are all talking about it. And we are all, for lack of a better word, extremely pissed off that we are in this situation and that our children are finding themselves in this situation, right? It's that protective mama bear status that comes up, that, oh, holy hell, not on my watch kind of thing. But I think for a lot of the older generation, they've been through cycles similar to this. I don't know that things have ever been as dire as they are right now for those that are still alive, right? Like obviously people who went through previous world wars and things like that, like those were some very trying times. But things are happening on our own soil right now, and they're impacting us more directly, I think, than they have perhaps in past generations. So I love the fact that the younger generation is willing to have the hard conversations and be vocal. And I think the older generations can be inspired by the younger generations to actually step up and take some action. So, there's always been people who, the protesters, like I think back to like when I was very, very young, but I remember seeing like footage on TV of protests and things like that. But I think it's at a different level now that we see that happening.
So, Mom, you have, just within our immediate family and our extended family, there's a lot of people that represent a bunch of different marginalized groups. And I know that has worried you. How have you dealt with that and how do you handle that worry?
Yeah, so that does hit me very heavily. I think there are a lot of people who maybe don't have friends, family, loved ones who fall into those marginalized groups, that it is easier for them to not be as concerned or to not have the level of worry that I experience. And that's worry around policies and laws and the climate we're leaving, our children. And we look at the number of natural disasters that have happened, and it's like, what's going to be left, right, for the people that I love? Politically, I worry about policies and things changing that are going to affect directly the rights, the safety, the opportunities available to people that I love. And that has made me lose some sleep for sure. And I try not to let myself be frozen by worry, because nothing positive is going to come from that. And that circles back to that question of kind of what can do. I don't know if you, Cayd, as someone from a marginalized group, you guys were already dealing with discrimination and things on a daily basis that white, middle class, Christian, especially males, weren't already dealing with that. Right? They weren't dealing with that on the daily, but you and your siblings have definitely dealt with it on a regular basis, right? And so now it's like taken to a next level. It's like ratcheted up a little bit. So how do you, Cayd, as someone as part of that marginalized group, and even being a United States citizen, like technically that should afford you, right? All rights, all privileges that should be afforded to all United States citizens. But right now, there are actual citizens that fall into those marginalized groups that are feeling very afraid for themselves. So, kind of, you have a family full of the same humans I do. You yourself are part of that group. How do you handle the worry? Are you worried?
For me, I don't think there's as much worry because, like you said, I've already experienced it. I've experienced hate and disrespect and things like that for my race, sexuality, like all of that, and nothing, not but just everything. And I that it almost kind of becomes numbing to a certain point. And I just think there's kind of like, and I can speak for a lot of people my age, just from what I've seen on social media, conversations with friends and stuff. A lot of us aren't fazed by what's going on because it's nothing new. And I think for a lot of people like you who are white Christian women who have kind of, yes, being a woman at certain points, you are kind of a part of a marginalized group, but in the big picture, you know, the fact that you are a white cisgendered person, whether that be woman or female, already puts you light years ahead of majority of anyone else that's not a part of that group. So I think for you, it's a lot more worry because it's almost kind of like the first time this is happening for you, or not necessarily happening to you, but you're seeing it to people you love, to your kids, to your friends, things like that. So I think it's kind of like that initial shock. The way I think of it, like if someone lives in Alaska, their whole entire life, they're going to be used to it being cold. But if someone from Houston, Texas goes to Alaska, it's going to feel like such a big shock of it being so cold versus just saying, it's always cold, it's whatever. So I think a lot of, and just like I said, from what I've seen on social media and stuff, a lot of us aren't worried because, especially in my generation, people my age, we've already gone through like 8 catastrophic events in our lifetime, and I'm only 21 years old. You know what I mean? Everything that we've gone through is unprecedented times, and this has never happened before. So I think a lot of it is normalized for us, and doesn't cause that much worry.
That's a really interesting, outlook. And when you say you've kind of become numb to whether it be the disrespect or things that you've experienced, right? Let's just take the fact that your dad is of Mexican descent, right? Therefore makes you half Mexican. You were born here to a mother who, for generations, have been citizens. I think for me, I have always been concerned about you guys being discriminated against because of, like you said, race, sexuality, anything like that. But this, to me, when it comes down to laws changing, moving backwards, right? Like generations, when it leaves me feeling like, is there going to be somewhere that it, obviously not one place in the United States, right, can accommodate all of the people, where like the weather's the most stable, where there's not these natural disasters. Like we live in the middle of the United States right now. It's only a matter of time before we experience something like that. But I think for me, that's why it has taken it up a level, is I feel like this is going a whole new direction, right? It's going much deeper. And I think that's the worry. And I personally hope I never get to the point of being numb to it, because then I worry that I'm going to become complacent and just kind of allow it to happen. And the last thing I want to be is complicit, right? Which be responsible for allowing this to happen, being part of the problem. So I think that's where some of my frustration comes in, about this whole thing. But I'm really interested, and we can flip the script and I'll answer that question later. But what frustrates you most about where we're at right now?
I think what frustrates me most, which kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, you can't change people's opinions and how they think. I think that's what frustrates me the most, the fact that you can't change that. The fact that for a lot of us, it is like second nature and it's common sense to care about the rights of others and to understand that everybody is a human being at the end of the day. And it's frustrating that not everyone feels that way. And it's frustrating that no matter how hard you try, no matter how long it takes, you can't convince people of that.
Yeah, that is a big frustration for me too. And where do we expend our energy? I think that part frustrates me too. Like I could continue to go down that cycle of frustration of trying to change the mind of people who, for whatever reason, have made the choices that they've made, whatever their beliefs are, however they decide to see the world, right? Which I do believe it is a choice. And that does frustrate me that they're not necessarily trying to understand, but I try to understand why they think the way they do. But at the end of the day, I'm never going to agree with the way that they feel. So I agree that is one of the most frustrating things. I think one thing that really frustrates me is, living in a country where we elect officials to essentially represent their population, right? That's not what's happening. Whether we're talking global warming or whether we're talking human rights, that's not what's happening for the most part. And whoever has power right now, I truly feel, does not have our best interests at heart. And that's all levels of government, right? Like we expect them to be protecting us. And I think that happens in all countries around the world. Like no one expects their government to be doing things that are just going to make their life worse. That is not our hope. So I think for me, that is one of my biggest frustrations. And it's not just the governments, it's big corporations, it's, all kinds of things, our healthcare system, our insurance system, our education system, like a lot of things, our justice system, a lot of things are very broken. And so I think, rather than seeing us collectively move towards making those things better, I feel like we're becoming more divided, more fractured. And like, how do we regain the ground that we're losing?
And I think the interesting point in that, which kind of is the opposite, is a lot of people think that what our government is doing and what our leaders are doing is bringing us to a better point. You were talking about how our elected officials are doing things that might not protect us or might not, be for the betterment of us. But at the end of the day, those people were elected into office and won a majority of vote from some people. So even though they're not representing what you would want, they're representing what the people want. There is a reason why the people that are president became president, because they won the most votes. And so I think that although that's frustrating, it, in my mind, opens my mind up to the bigger picture that there are maybe these, you look at our political system, the president, the Congress, Senate, House, all of that, our judicial branch, you look at that, and from our perspective, we think, okay, that's not representing my beliefs and what I think. But on the flip side, all of those people were elected for a reason and were elected by people. So that allows me to take a step back and think, okay, if these people are in office and they have racist or homophobic or racial views or, just different views like that I don't agree with, that opens my mind up to a bigger picture that there are thousands and millions of those people that think that way in our country. And that to me is the scarier part. It's not scary that we have a president that is making racial comments or taking rights away from people. That isn't the scary part to me. The scary part to me is that millions of people support that and voted for that and want that. So I think that although our political system is broken and does need to be addressed, I think that they should not take all of the blame for it. And I don't think that it's necessarily all their doing.
Right, because they didn't get there on their own. Right?
Exactly.
They didn't get there on their own. And so I was listening to another podcast this morning, and they were talking about the different views of the states, right? So you've got states that vote blue traditionally, states that vote purple, and states that vote red. And where issues fall in that is a whole nother discussion. But they were referring to them as free states and slave states. Like we're, talking about this Civil War, which not actual like guns and spears and things like that, but actually that is going on, in our country. And where it's going to fall to like those governors, right, that are affecting what's happening, let's say in California or in Washington or in, Illinois, states that are truly blue, like they're able at this point in time to enact laws to represent the people of their states, but not everybody who thinks blue can move to the handful of states that, that are blue. And so it does kind of feel like a civil war to me. And I think it's important to remember the point that you made about the people that actually voted for the people who are representing all Americans. That is the scarier piece, because that is what is going to affect us at the local level. And so affect our daily operations in the communities we live in, right? And we'll talk about community in a minute. But yeah, that's an interesting
For
take,
sure.
that actually the mindset of others, right? And we love to other people.
Hmm.
The mindset of others is actually more scary to me.
For sure.
That is a good point. So awesome.
For sure. So, Mom, how or what do you think we can do to stand up? You kind of talked about not wanting to be complacent and just sitting there and kind of watching it all go by. So, what ideas do you have? How do you stand up? How do you make changes? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I just feel like we can't do nothing. Like the first thing I try to do is to get like objective, which this is becoming harder and harder, but objective, factual information, right? Coming in. Like it would be really easy for me to only listen to one side, right? To only listen to
Hmm.
voices coming from progressive media sources, right? Like that would be one way of handling it. Not that I am going to start listening to the other side, right? But like, who are the people still in the middle who are being objective about what it is that they are reporting? And like I said, that's becoming harder and harder. So I think keeping yourself informed, although challenging, is super important. Like if you are only listening to one side, you are just contributing to the division, right? That is,
Hmm.
we're just going to continue to be polarized. And I think until common sense prevails and the communities at large can come together and agree on certain pieces around all the issues, right? Like I think it's
Hmm.
going to be really difficult for us to make any headway or make any ground. So that's number one for me, is to try to obtain objective information. And then to really reach out to the people in my circles do fall part of those marginalized groups and make sure that they know that they are safe with me. I think that is what is really, really important to me. Is I want them to know that they can come to me and share their frustration. They can come to me and share their experiences. I hope they do. They can come to me and they know that I am a safe place that is going to accept them for who they are without question. And I think that's all part of building a community again, which we actually have a talking point on that later. But that's the second thing I do is reach out to the
Hmm.
people that I know, and even strangers, right? Like I think this podcast, like there will be people that listen to this that maybe we don't know, or people that interact with us on social media that maybe we don't know directly, but I want them to know that I'm a safe space. And then
Hmm.
I look for small ways both to protect our family, right? But then also to make a statement way that I can, and to stand behind what I believe and what I'm saying. So that might look at choosing which products to buy. That might look like choosing which stores to shop at. That might look like deciding to grow my own vegetables in the backyard. That there's all kinds of things that I can do, right? That may not have an impact at the highest level of policy, right? But that can truly affect the people I come in contact with on the daily. I also am not going to sit down and shut up. That is something that I can do. I'm not going to stop talking. I am not going to stop trying to learn. I am not going to stop reading books that help me understand where we're at this point in time. So I think it's important for us to take the small actions that we can, but also to really focus on where we can truly make an impact, whether that be small actions we're taking or whether that be getting involved in our communities at a community level, supporting those agencies and organizations, whether that be through dollars or time or volunteering, whatever that might look like, that are supporting the people that I want to see supported, the people who may be losing their freedoms, who may be losing their rights. What can I do physically, and not just talking about it, right? Like that's not enough. But I do feel there is a role in lending any platform I have, whether it be this podcast or my social media, to the voices that are already doing the work. Like that's important to me. So what role can I play in that? And so again, I'm just kind of in the discovery phase of all of this, as things kind of turn on their head. But like you said, we have been recycling for years. Like I was actually astounded when we moved here from Minnesota to Kansas more than 15 years ago. We were recycling everything in Minnesota, and we moved here to where there was not the opportunity to recycle unless you paid somewhere to take your recycling. And the participation rates in recycling here still 15 years later are disheartening. to me, living here. And that's just one example of, things that we have chosen to continue to try to do as a family. Our recycle bin is always very, very full. And if I could get weekly pickup rather than every other week, I would, rather than garbage every week, because we have very little garbage in our family. So that's just one example of something that I can do to help on that front. So what about you, Cayd? Like, we can't sit and do nothing, like I said. So what do you actively do or see yourself doing or want to do to help, number one, make yourself feel better, but make the situation in which we're in better in small ways?
For sure. I think everything you mentioned, I definitely agree with. And then, just making sure you're going out and voting and doing what you can do, kind of like we talked about earlier, making sure even if, the candidate you don't support doesn't, or the candidate you support doesn't end up winning, you at least made your voice heard and you did your part. And I think that local elections are very important. And that is really what makes the big difference. You're able to elect your senators, you're able to elect your congresspeople, you're able to elect your state senators and the member of your state house and your state's governor and things like that. So I think that those are all important. And I think also kind of just something in line with yourself is make sure that you're taking time for yourself and making sure that you're well taken care of. A lot of the times we can, be so focused on trying to do what we can to make the situation better or fix things or whatever, that we kind of put taking care of ourselves to the side. So I think that it's important to remember that you're doing that, because at the end of the day, you can't do anything if you're not well taken care of. And I think something too that I have kind of realized too is sometimes you have to accept that things aren't your fight to fight. And that even if you believe in it, even if, I know there's been a lot of a talk after the election from people who did not vote for Trump, kind of just not necessarily accepting defeat, but saying, I did what I could. I voted. I, tried to educate people who were voting to, on what policies they were voting on and things like that. And I think we are kind of in a phase now, especially in our political climate, and even along with just our actual climate in the world that we live in. I think a lot of what we're in is in a phase where people are just going to have to see for themselves what they should have done or what can do going forward. So I think it's important to understand that it's not your fight to fight. It's not your job to change everybody around you. It's not your job to, start a protest every single Saturday. It's not like, if you want to do that, that's great. But I think that it's important to understand that it's not your responsibility. And a lot of the time we take on things that aren't ours to take on. So just keeping that in mind.
So this conversation has made me think of three other things. One is really focusing on where you can still find joy on the daily in your life. Like, I think it's really important to not get so consumed, right, by all the negative feelings that you lose sight of what still is really good in your life. That's one thing. Same podcast I was listening to, they were talking about choose your issues. What are the issues that you really truly believe in, and then go all in. So like trying to go deep rather than go wide. Like, you're going to have more positive effect, right, by being able to go all in on the topics that truly you do hold dear to your heart, than to try to address everything, right? And now I'm blanking on the third thing. It will circle back to me, I'm sure. But so, Cayd, if we stand up for what's right, in ways that align with our own personal values, how do you plan to keep yourself safe, or do you?
I think one thing to keep in mind is just to, use your common sense. Think, is this going to be a safe environment? Am I going to be safe? Be aware of your surroundings. I think when you look at things like protests and things like that, a lot of the times there is a lot of risk with that. And that goes back to what I mentioned of choose your fights. If protesting is not something that you're wanting to do, if you're not, willing to risk possibly being arrested or being gassed or being different things like that, then that is just maybe something that's not for you. I don't think everyone needs to protest. I don't think everyone needs to run for office. I don't think everyone needs to have a sign in their yard. Like, I think that everyone kind of needs to find their place of where they fit in. So I think just, using your common sense, being aware of your surroundings, being aware of what's going on. If you are going to protest, I know a lot of them have Facebook groups or Instagram pages you can go to and see if, they're advising you to bring any materials like, face coverings or things like that. And then I think, as far as when you asked, or do you even keep yourself safe? I think that it's important to remember that a lot of the times what you're doing to stand up for what's right isn't going to be safe. And again, you have to accept whether or not that is is a concern of yours. And I know, you as a parent, that's something you consider a lot. I know during the Black Lives Matter protests and things like that back in 2020, my brother was very active in protests, and I saw how that kind of gave you a little bit of anxiety and nervousness over his safety. But I think that it's important to remember that no big major changes that have been made in our society over the last couple of centuries have come peacefully. 9 times out of 10, peaceful protests do not do anything. 9 times out of 10, just standing outside your state Senate house does not do anything. So a lot of what you have to do to get change comes with risk. And not saying that that is right, or that's the way it should be, or that it's okay, but that's just the way it is. So I think if there's something that you're really, standing firm on, and there is a protest and you want to go, and you're okay with risking being arrested or being gassed or being harmed, sometimes you have to accept that risk. It's the same way when you invest your money in the stock market. Sometimes you accept the risk that, you're going to lose everything you have. It's the same way when you cook a new recipe. You have to accept the risk that it might turn out nasty, and then you don't have anything to eat for dinner. So I think it's important to evaluate the risk of whatever you're doing. And again, kind of using that analogy, that's why not everyone invests in the stock market, because not everyone is ready to make that risk. So if you're not, that is okay. But just being aware of that risk and being aware of your surroundings.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, even as a woman, I mean, it's always been an issue for me, my own personal safety, right, around being a female. Like, women live with that fear all the time. So it was interesting because you were talking earlier about kind of becoming numb to that kind of disrespect and that kind of danger. However, we're going to have to talk further about this, because I don't feel like I've become numb to the danger that I face as a female, or the discrimination, right, that potentially women face. So that's interesting. We might have to talk about that topic on today. But I definitely feel like that, when you stand up for something that's right, and you are taking risks, like, that's where it comes back to that choose what your hot topics are, and what are you willing to stand on. Like I said, I'm not going to sit down and shut up. So that is something that I am willing to do, is speak out and speak up when I feel like something is happening that is detrimental to us as a society, no matter what that is. So you have to decide what risks you're willing to take. I probably am not going to appear at a rally, right? Like, that's not something, number one, given the fact that I am a very short, a little bit older female, right? Like, I would fear for my own personal safety in that type of an environment. So that is probably not the way in which I would choose to express my displeasure with things that are going on. So yeah, you have to consider the risk and decide, what you're willing to take. Keeping yourself safe for your family, for your loved ones, like, is something important to consider. But I would never, ever, and I never said to your brother, like, don't go to that march. I don't want you doing this. If that's what felt true to him and felt like something he needed to do, something he wanted to experience, then by all means, I would support him in doing that. Am I going to lose sleep? Yeah, I am, checking that location on the day of to make sure that he made it home safely. But that's definitely,
for sure,
something that causes worry for parents. So
for sure. So right now, I feel like there's a lot of information being spewed at us and thrown at us, and just everything is all over the place. So what are you doing to, make sure that you're getting your information from a good quality source, and how are you seeking out that information? And then what are you doing to kind of just regulate your nervous system and your anxiety or your worry as you're getting that information? Because a lot of it, especially now with, media and social media, a lot of it is these big, scary headlines that sometimes make things seem worse than they are. So how do you kind of navigate that?
So that was actually my third thing. Now you helped me to remember.
It all came full circle.
It all came full circle, as I knew it would. If I was meant to, right, it would circle back. So don't be part of fueling the fire, right? Like, that's another thing we can do. Like, going totally to one side and just continuing to ride the division and continue to, instill more fear in people and doing things like that. That's not helpful to getting us where we need to go. So just make sure that you are not adding fuel to the negative pieces of the fire. Sometimes there's positive
Mm-hmm.
pieces of the fire, right? That will help to propel change. But I have a feeling it is going to be a slow climb back to maybe where we were with especially the human rights issue. I don't know that we can ever make it back to where we were with the climate, and it seems like kind of this is turning into a discussion about all the climates that we're
Mm-hmm.
in, but standing up for that. So definitely I feel like right now we're drinking out of a fire hose. There is so much information coming at us fast, furious. Some of the information, right, is getting people really fired up. But that information, the changes that are being made are not going to stand, right? Like it's never going to turn into an actual thing. So I really try to remind myself, I need to know how history works. I need to know how our country works. I need to know, how do things become an amendment? How do amendments get unraveled? How do laws get made? What role does the judicial system play? Like who can we trust to do their jobs? Like, is it the governors that are standing up? Is it senators that are standing up? I really look at my media sources again, like I talked about, and try to find some of the middle ground, right? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
interested in listening 100% to either side. So try to find that middle ground. I think you really have to keep social media in check. And if you have so tightly curated your feed on certain platforms to only represent people who look like you, believe like you, live like you, worship like you, right? Like you're only going to get fed information that is in full alignment with what you already believe. And it's never going to challenge you to maybe think about why the other side thinks the way they do. I think it's important for us to understand what their motivations are, what their priorities are, how they got to the decision that they did. I think it's important to do that. So I'm very careful on social media to not only consume things that are in alignment with what I believe. That being said, I also, like, if I see things that I don't feel are accurate, I'm going to speak up and I'm willing to be challenged, right? And again, trying not to escalate situations. I am very careful with the words that I use. I try not to blame. I try not to make people feel stupid. I try not to make people feel like they're losing their agency, right? I try to tell them what to do, but to literally just represent my thoughts and my side and how I got to the decisions that I did. Because people will only change when they're ready, and we'll do it through being inspired to do so, right? Not because someone tells them to. That just creates more resistance. So I'm really careful about that. And then when I am consuming stuff and it is coming at us fast and furious, like I have things in place on the daily that help me to stay level. So, I am going to be doing my journaling every day. I am going to be reading some nonfiction and some fiction so I can check out of life. I'm going to be doing things like going to see movies that maybe are just for fun, right? To kind of balance out, right, the crazy, because you could take your entire day, 24 hours in a day, trying to consume everything that's happening, right? But you are not going to be a healthy person if that's what you're doing. I remember going back to the Iraqi War. I had a cousin who was actually a Marine serving over there during that time. And for weeks and weeks, I was like fixated on the TV and wanting to see what was happening specifically around his platoon and where I knew them to be and that kind of thing. And it ate me alive, right? While that was happening. So I also was younger at that period of time, and so didn't have the life experience that I have now to realize that there does need to be a balance in your life. So, getting some exercise, getting some fresh air, those things are important to kind of counterbalance the time you're spending. So spend time with family and friends. I know we just had family dinner night on Saturday night, and even though it just lasted a couple of hours, that really helped me to kind of reset just what is really important. Who are the people who I truly have the ability to enjoy and nurture and have an impact on, right? Like, so Cayd, talking to you about how do you make sure your nervous system stays level, and where are you getting your information and how
Mm-hmm.
it's that?
For sure. I think my kind of viewpoint with information is just to kind of take in as much as you can and get it from different sources, get it from social media, get it from news articles, get it from, right leaning pages, get it from left leaning pages, get it from more moderate pages, and do that just to kind of get as much. And I feel like once you have all that information, then you are more easily able to kind of sift through it and figure out what, true, what is not true. Again, kind of going back to headlines, I think sometimes things are over dramatized. So when you're able to really read them, figure out what's going on, that is kind of my way to sift through information. But I also don't sit on my phone or on my computer for hours and just read articles and things like that. But if I do see a headline that says, XYZ is happening, okay, let me go find 3 or 4 different articles about, about whatever that topic is. Let's say a new bill is being passed. Let me go find 3 or 4 different articles about that bill, read about it. Let me go watch a couple TikToks about the bill. Let me go see what Twitter is saying about the bill. Things like that. So I think that is able to kind of allow me to be able to quickly go through and say, okay, this is what's actually happening. This is, the truth part of it. And then I think as far as regulating your nervous system, it's just important, like I said, remember that a lot of the things that are happening, you can't do anything right now to change it. You can't, if there's a new bill being passed, you can't say stop the bill. There's nothing that we can do. So I think that kind of recognizing the fact that it's not burden to carry and it's not your duty to try to change it single-handedly by yourself, and that nothing you can do is going to make the change happen quicker. You can contribute to the change and you can do your part, but nothing you can do is going to directly impact, that bill being passed or this person being elected or things like that. And so I think that a little bit of reassurance for me comes in the fact that I know that I voted and I know that I was vocal on social media about the way I felt about this policy and that policy and things like that. So just knowing that I did my part is kind of reassuring to me.
Yeah. And, I know just from knowing you that doesn't mean that you're washing your hands of this whole thing and just let the next however many years slide by while things continue to decline. But I think you're probably still in discovery mode too, right? Of figuring out like where it is you and what impact you can make and where you want to apply pressure. And I like your point of keeping it contained to a certain time of the day. Like I actually made the decision in December when we were kind of in flux between the election and inauguration that I was not going to follow the news at all. Like December is my favorite month of the year. Like I'm not going to let it steal my joy. And so I didn't tune in to traditional news sources, which traditional news sources right now are not what I consider to be reasonable, logical, logistical, truthful. Like that's just not feeling like a place where I'm getting my information. But I chose for the whole month of December not to engage on that. Now, I did tell both you and your stepdad that, hey, if there's something I need to be aware of, clue me in. But you guys were kind of my filter to help me protect my own mental health, right? That did allow me to enter January with a clearer head and to know that, okay, I am going to swipe right on my iPhone once a day, read the headlines. I am going to visit certain news sources once a day, read what's happening, and then I'm checking out from it because I can't let that, if 10 times a day I'm going in to see, oh, what happened now? Like I'm going to exist at this altered state, right? This entire time. So I think that that's important to remember, to keep it contained to a part of your day. It's not your whole life. It might be the life worth living, but it's not your whole life. So circling back to community. So how do you think that we can build community at a time where there is such division? So community might be what gets us through this, right? And so kind of how do you define community and what do you think we can do to build community during this time?
For sure. I think your community is just the people that are around you are going to be able to support you through whatever happens. Kind of like you talked about earlier, making sure the people that feel safe with and feel like they can come to you. I feel like building connections is really important, especially as, things begin to progress in our political climate and things like that. Having people to connect with, having people to have these conversations with is really important. And I think that building that community is what we all need. And I think especially as we look at possibilities of grocery prices being increased with certain things that are going on, or gas getting more expensive, cost of living going up and things that under the new administration, I think it's important to kind of look to your community for that. And I honestly won't be surprised if we see kind of a resurgence of like kind of the old school community of going to your neighbor to, ask if they have any sugar, or, the farmer that lives a mile down the street, getting eggs from them instead of the grocery store, things like that. And I know just even on social media, like a lot of people have started to do things like make their own butter, things like that, or their own jams or own desserts or bread or different things like that, to kind of be able to provide for themselves and provide themselves for a cheaper way. And I think that kind of that, again, that old school sense of community of, okay, I bake bread and I know my neighbor has eggs, so let's, trade those. Or I know I can sew and my neighbor can work on cars, so let me, trade it that way. Whatever it may be, I think that community is going to be very important in the coming years. So I think that building that, understanding those connections will definitely be very important. But what about for you, Mom? What's your view on community?
I agree with you 100%. And I think, in some ways, recapturing some of what was really good about old style community, right? Recapturing some of
Mm-hmm.
that. So that makes me really happy to hear you say that, because like, as far as your memory goes back, like, did that ever exist? We lived on a really great cul-de-sac when we lived in Minnesota, and that was our community, right? That circle of 10 houses, 20 plus kids, and that was a community for us. We have a large family. That is also a community built in, right? But I think that reaching out, getting to know your neighbors, like I think COVID really did a number on people. The whole pandemic did a number on people and made people shrink their community, right? And if they had any community, it was virtual by necessity. And I think a lot of us have stayed stuck in the virtual nature of life. And I would really challenge people, which I have challenged myself on this too, to step outside of your Zoom box and actually get out physically into your community, make real live friends, join real live groups of humans, and being in proximity to other people who do not look like you, do not believe like you, do not act like you, do not worship like you. Like, being in community with them makes it a whole lot less scary, right? Once you know people that belong to those other groups, it makes it a lot less scary. And that understanding is where we need to get, and supporting each other through the hard times, whether that's, Cayd, apparently your neighbors are now going to be looking at you for bread.
Mm-hmm.
It's been baking sourdough down that journey. But I do think you're right, that I think there's going to be that sense of community. I also think, with where our economy is going, that there is going to be a resurgence of multiple generations living together, I think, out of necessity over time. And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I grew up with a great grandma who lived with my grandma and grandpa. And I thought, I don't know how my grandma and grandpa felt about it, and I can't ask them now because they've moved on. But I thought, as their grandchild and great grandchild, that it was a fabulous thing. That the first thing when I came down the stairs in the morning was my great grandma asking me what kind of egg I wanted, right? I love the fact that, people are starting to relearn some of those things, like how do we can things? How do we do things like that we've just relied on, the establishment to provide for us. And so we're relearning how to do those things that we probably would have learned from our grandparents at a different time in society. So that building community, finding out what other people know, finding out what other people have, how you can trade those things out, learn from each other, and even just having a community to talk your feelings through with, I think is really, really important. So again, I would encourage people, get outside the walls of your home if you can, and try to build some real live relationships with people, because I think that's going to serve us well going forward.
For sure. So, Mom, how do we get our voices heard by anyone who has the ability to change the trajectory of this? I kind of mentioned earlier, there's very little that you can do just individually by yourself, but how do you make your voices heard to the people that can make those changes?
Yeah, I think, don't underestimate what contacting, your local congressman, contacting your senator, what those things can do. It's going to be consistency, and it's going to be numbers, right? That help to push the trajectory, at least on the government front, right? It's definitely being willing to speak up when you feel things aren't right. And that's what this whole podcast is about, is standing up. So whether that means it's your neighbor that hears you today, and it's your city councilman that hears you tomorrow, and it's your representative that hears you the day after that, I think we have a system in place. Yes, it is broken, but I do believe in the goodness of humanity overall, even in this country. Am I scared by the numbers of which maybe don't believe like me, that maybe are willing to sacrifice the rights or the viewing of everyone as human, deserving of all of the same things? That does scare me, and getting them to hear me probably is never going to happen. But in numbers, I think in mass, finding those people who truly want to be part of making a difference, I think that is going to help us change the trajectory. That is how we have gotten here so far. I hope it doesn't take us decades. Like, I was listening to another podcast and was learning about the suffragettes, right? That how long it took them to get the right to vote for women and everything that they went through to get there. And that there was actually only one woman alive that was part of that original movement who was able to vote the first year that women had that right. And that even then, Black women still did not have the right to vote. And so that to me was like, just knowing we're in this for the long haul, I think, and being willing to be consistent and to not back down, I think is how we're going to get our voice heard.
I definitely agree with all of that. I think, like I said, it's just important to remain consistent and to, you know, do what you can at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. What can parents do to support their young adults who might feel at a loss right now, or who are on the flip side, they're just flaming outraged at what's going on? How can parents kid where they're at and try to support them? What advice could you give?
I think for young adults who are feeling at a loss and feeling, very disheartened and things like that, as parents, just be there to support them, to love them, to let them know that, even though a majority of the people in their country, may not support them, whether that be based off their gender, their sexuality, or their race, or their beliefs, or things like that, that they're still supported with you and supported in their community. And I think for on the flip side, those young adults who are, enraged and are ready to take action, I think parents can, encourage that while also, kind of like we talked about earlier, reminding them to stay safe and be conscious of things that are going on and things like that. But I think either way, no matter what end of the spectrum, your big is on, or even if they're somewhere in the middle and maybe they're, kind of confused on what to do, I think it's important to support them through that, and to know that any action is the right action. If you're feeling just like sad and lost and stuck, that's okay. Should you get out of it eventually? Yes, but there is no need to get out of it tomorrow. There's no rush to get through that. If you're feeling sad, cry about it. If you're, feeling angry, you to a rage room or go do something. Or, if you are, having that drive to make change, encourage them to do that. There's no right or wrong way to take action. So however they see fit, I think it's important to encourage them through that.
Yeah, and to safe space, right, for them to have those conversations and to really work to understand each other if your views differ and your approaches differ. I think that's really, really important, because it begins at home, right? It begins in your family and then carries out to the community at large. So, well, there you have it, a peek into what the conversations in our family have looked like during this critical time in our history. I want to be proud of how I choose to act during this time. I want to be able to tell my future grandchildren how I stood up for those who didn't have a voice, stood up for what's right, didn't bury my head in the sand and do nothing. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I am dedicated to figuring it out. So some days I feel like I can make a difference, and other days, right now, I'm in despair. Both are valid, and I allow myself to protect my peace, gather my reserves, and then march forward toward a version of life that allows all humans the freedoms, rights, and privileges they should have without question. I support and encourage my kids and all of you to do the same. Cayd, any closing thoughts you'd like to share about standing up for what's right before you close us out?
For sure. I think it's just important to remember that you can do what you can, but also to remember to take care of yourself through the whole process. Take time to work on your mental health, take time to work on your physical health. If you are very active in, what's going on, take a little bit of time to take a step back from that, unplug, go for a walk without your phone, do something like that. And if you are worried, about your safety of your friends, your family, your loved ones, like I said, just remember to be conscious of your surroundings, be conscious of what's going on, stay in tune. There's a lot of resources that you can access that allow you to figure out what's going on in the current state of our political world. But just remember to stay safe, everyone. With that being said, I think that is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. We thank you all for listening today. We hope you found some takeaways, a fresh perspective, and maybe even an action step or two in this episode. Again, we are not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little more joy-filled for those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Please subscribe and share with those in your circles who you think might benefit from hearing it. A new episode is released on those three platforms every single week.
You can also visit my life coaching website at marcihawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarci@gmail.com. I am on Facebook at Life Coach Marci and Instagram at life_coach_Marci. Where can our listeners find you, Cayd?
Of course, my handle across all social media platforms is at the Cayd Barragan. The best way to contact us or give us feedback is to DM either one of us on social media or to reach out on the contact me page on my mom's website. Again, that is marcihawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback or topic ideas that you may like to share, and we will see you next time on Raising Bigs.
Bye, everybody.